Xin Jin, born into a family of military generals, had ancestors who fought for the emperor and achieved glorious military merits. When it came to Xin Jin, he couldn't wait to create a record of achievements that his ancestors had never had before. A mere general was no longer in his eyes. He yearned for the position that was second to none but above all others. At this time, after assassinating Qin Yushan, he met Yi Yanyu, the daughter of the prematurely deceased Uncle Yi. He thought she was just a passerby, so he coerced her to help him detoxify. Unexpectedly, after feeding him the pill, Yi Yanyu recognized his true identity and said she could help him fulfill his long-cherished wish. Xin Jin thought she was just talking nonsense, thinking she wanted his help to revive the Yi family. However, Yi Yanyu repeatedly guessed the changes in the court correctly. Xin Jin gradually started to believe in Yi Yanyu's words, and even against his mother's opposition, he insisted on marrying Yi Yanyu. Firstly, Yi Yanyu had saved his life, and secondly, he did need such a helper. Yi Yanyu often advised Xin Jin, and for a while, he was in a favorable position in the court, and he also favored Yi Yanyu more and more day by day, regardless of her framing of Wen Ning. As for Wen Ning, Xin Jin didn't have a deep impression of her, only remembering that she was quiet and not talkative. Because of Yi Yanyu, he rarely spent the night in Wen Ning's room, because every time it was midnight, Yi Yanyu would always think of different excuses to invite him to leave. And Wen Ning never said a word to keep him. Over time, the relationship between him and Wen Ning was only a nominal couple. Until one day, he heard from Mrs. Wen that Wen Ning had stayed at her grandfather's house for a while before she got married to the Xin family, studying detoxification pharmacology. And the pills made by Wen Ning's grandfather had the same effect as the one Yi Yanyu fed her on the day he was poisoned. And the day he hid in the temple's outer forest, Wen Ning also went to the temple to pray with Mrs. Wen. And he had always mistaken Yi Yanyu as his benefactor and indulged her in framing her many times. For a while, Xin Jin was filled with guilt towards Wen Ning. At this time, it happened that King Yongning asked him to guard the frontier to control the military power. The great event was not yet accomplished, and he could not lose Yi Yanyu for the time being. So he left with Yi Yanyu, allowing Wen Ning to live a more peaceful life. He often wrote letters to Wen Ning, not knowing what to write at first, just a few words to inquire about the family. Later he wrote longer and longer, sometimes feeling that he was too talkative. But Wen Ning never replied to his letters, perhaps because she still had a grudge against his attitude at the beginning. Xin Jin thought, after the great event is done, he will accompany her every day, and he will definitely be able to resolve the conflicts between the two. Shao Qi died, and King Yongning asked him to lead the troops to subdue the remaining forces. And Yi Yanyu did not obediently tell him everything as before, but asked him to make her the legitimate wife. She wanted the commitment of the legitimate wife's position, and it seemed that everything between her and him was a transaction of interests. But Yi Yanyu always said that she was just afraid of losing him. He gradually began to feel disgusted with this, but for the sake of the overall situation, he had to persuade Wen Ning to give up her position. When he went back to the capital and coaxed her, Wen Ning would definitely let go of the past, Xin Jin thought. However, Wen Ning was 100 times more ruthless than he thought. On the day he returned to the capital, she hanged herself in the main hall of the house, and before dying, she disdained to look at him again. Clearly, he had written letters to her for 8 years. Why didn't she understand his intentions at all? The scene of Wen Ning's body being swallowed by the fire could not be dispelled in his mind for a long time, becoming his heart disease. He often dreamed that there was no Yi Yanyu between him and Wen Ning, and the two supported each other. Wen Ning replaced Yi Yanyu and became his virtuous assistant, and more importantly, the Wen Ning in the dream loved him wholeheartedly. Yi Yanyu was dissatisfied with his mumbling in his sleep and often made a fuss in the middle of the night. Accidentally, she slipped up and said that the letters he had sent to Wen Ning for the past 8 years had all been burned by her. Later, he no longer shared a bed with Yi Yanyu. But she said that Wen Ning came to find her, and in the end, she scared herself and suffered from madness. In the decades after losing Wen Ning, he became the most trusted minister of the emperor and became the prime minister. But he also lost the most important thing. Qin Yushan, after recognizing his own nephew Shao Qi, spent most of his time secretly eliminating dissenters for his nephew at night. This included corrupt officials, and sometimes even unscrupulous martial arts sects that disregarded the law. Qin Yushan poured all his guilt towards his elder sister into Shao Qi, and even if he might not return, he had no regrets. In the last life, when he met Wen Ning, he was severely injured, escaped the pursuit, and climbed over the wall into a backyard full of medicinal herbs. Qin Yushan didn't care much, randomly picked some hemostatic herbs, applied the medicine, and hid in a concealed place to rest. Just as he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps approaching from not far away. The steps were slow, and it should not be the martial arts practitioners chasing him. Qin Yushan let out a sigh of relief, but still listened vigilantly. "Amiss, the herbs are all messed up? And there's blood," a woman exclaimed. Another woman was very calm. "You go get some water and wipe the blood clean. As for the herbs, if someone asks, you can say that I took them to make pills. As for the residue, you can say that I failed to make the pills and took them to dump." She carefully erased his traces to avoid exposure. But she didn't even know his identity. "Amiss, it's obvious that someone has broken in to steal. Is it okay to cover up like this?" Her maid was not in favor of this. If it weren't for being at the end of one's rope, he wouldn't have rushed in to steal the herbs. Look, he didn't take much, probably just the amount needed for a treatment, and look at the blood, he must have been seriously injured. The woman's voice was gentle and accurately pointed out Qin Yushan's condition. And moreover, these herbs are nothing to us, and cleaning the blood is a small effort. But for that person, it may be a chance to survive. The woman was still trying to persuade her maid. A few words fell into Qin Yushan's ears, turning into a warm stream that went straight to the bottom of his heart. He wanted to see this girl and repay her kindness. After leaving, Qin Yushan asked Shao Qi to find out her identity. His young and mature nephew's eyes brightened after hearing this, and he couldn't help teasing, "Uncle, is the iron tree in bloom after 1,000 years?" A single sentence made him blush and flee. The border is often harassed by neighboring countries, and this time it even triggered a riot. He was ordered to go on an expedition, and the night before his departure, he found out that she was a girl from the Wen family, Wen Ning. But before he could meet her, he received the news of her marriage to Xin Jin, who was well off. That day, he stayed up all night, hating that fate had played a trick on him and didn't let him meet Wen Ning earlier. But he never thought that his encounter with Wen Ning would be the last meeting of their lives. King Yongning had ulterior motives and played dirty tricks on him during the chaos. The moment before he closed his eyes, Qin Yushan was thinking about the capital thousands of miles away. He hoped that Shao Qi could stabilize the court during his absence, that his soul could return to the capital to see her after death, and that he could meet his elder sister in the netherworld. None of the hopes came true. Qin Yushan opened his eyes and returned to 2 years before his death. At that time, Wen Ning had not yet been engaged to Xin Jin, and King Yongning had not yet harbored the idea of killing him, and everything was still in time. So he quietly paid attention to Wen Ning's whereabouts, planning to find a perfect opportunity to meet her. Finally, one night, he saw Wen Ning sneak out. Out of concern, he followed. But unexpectedly, he found that another person was following her. That person was Xin Jin, who took advantage of Wen Ning's unpreparedness and took her into a dark alley. Qin Yushan didn't have time to think and hurriedly took action. As a result, Wen Ning was actually moved by his heroic rescue of the beauty, and said she would repay him with her life. He originally thought that Wen Ning was just making a promise in a moment of urgency, but she actually kissed him and asked him to propose marriage at the Wen residence. Qin Yushan touched the tip of his nose, as if it still had the lingering warmth of her fingertips, both surprised and delighted. He made up his mind in secret, in this life, no matter what, he must protect Wen Ning. Grow old together, never leave each other in life and death.